They didn't ask what happened. They just looked at me and said, "You're overreacting." I realized then that no amount of explaining was ever going to be enough, because understanding was never the goal. So I stopped explaining myself. And that's when everything started to change. They said it like a diagnosis, not angry, not concerned, certain. "You're overreacting." Everyone agreed. That's when I realized something I should have seen years earlier. This wasn't a misunderstanding that needed clarity. It was a system that needed my confusion. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 34, worked as an operations coordinator, and had spent most of my adult life being the person who explained. Explained my tone, explained my intentions, explained why something hurt instead of pretending it didn't. They'd trained me well. Every time something crossed a line, I'd gather my thoughts carefully, choose my words, offer context, try to be reasonable. And every time, the response was the same. "You're sensitive. You take things too personally. You always make it bigger than it needs to be." I thought if I explained it better, they'd understand. They never did. Sitting there that day, listening to them nod along with each other, something clicked. Understanding wasn't missing. Consent was. I asked one question. What part of this is an overreaction? No one answered directly. They never do. Instead, I got deflection. "Well, it just didn't need to turn into all this. You could have handled it differently. You didn't have to react like that." They were talking about my response, not what caused it. That's when I stopped talking, not dramatically, not defiantly. I just stopped explaining. The room felt different immediately. They waited for me to fill the silence, to soften it, to clarify what I meant. I didn't. I realized something then that made everything very simple. As long as I kept explaining myself, they'd keep telling me I was wrong. So I didn't correct them. I didn't justify myself. I let the silence sit. They thought that meant they'd won. What they didn't realize was that silence was the first boundary I'd ever enforced. And once that boundary was in place, nothing was going to work the way it had before. At first, they thought my silence was temporary. A pause, a mood, something I'd eventually fill in, the way I always had. They waited. I didn't speak. My mother was the first to test it. "So, are you going to explain what that was about?" she asked lightly, as if giving me an opening. I shook my head. "No." She laughed, uncomfortable. "You can't just shut down." "I'm not shutting down," I said. "I'm done explaining." That sentence landed heavier than anything I'd said before. They tried again a few days later. A group message, a carefully worded check-in. Concern disguised as curiosity. "We just want to understand where you're coming from." I read it and put my phone down. Understanding had never been the issue. The tone shifted after that. Less curiosity, more correction. "You're being distant. You're acting different. You're making this awkward." They didn't say wrong anymore. They said difficult. That's when I noticed something important. Without my explanations, they had nothing to argue against. No words to twist, no emotions to reframe, no justifications to minimize. So they focused on the silence itself, treating it like a problem that needed fixing. My sibling confronted me directly. "You know they think you're overreacting," they said. "You could just clear this up." I looked at them calmly. "Clear up what?" They hesitated. "Well, everything." Exactly. The pressure didn't come all at once. It came in small adjustments. I wasn't looped into plans until the last minute. Information was shared selectively. Conversations went quiet when I entered the room. It wasn't accidental, it was training. They wanted me uncomfortable enough to start explaining again, to defend myself, to justify my reactions so they could dismiss them. I didn't. Instead, I noticed how peaceful my mind felt. No rehearsing conversations, no preemptive apologies, no strategizing how to be understood. For the first time, I wasn't trying to convince anyone of my reality. I was simply living in it. That's when I understood the real function of "you're overreacting." It wasn't feedback, it was a warning, a reminder of where my role ended and theirs began. And the moment I stopped responding to it, the entire structure started to wobble. Once I stopped explaining, they started guessing. And they were bad at it. They assumed I was angry. Then they assumed I was sulking. Then they assumed I was waiting for someone to chase me. Each assumption was safer than admitting what was actually happening, that I wasn't confused anymore. The first real crack showed when my mother confronted me. "You can't just withdraw like this," she said. "It's unhealthy." I looked at her calmly. What's unhealthy is having to justify my feelings every time they make you uncomfortable. She frowned. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" I asked. "Making it bigger." That was when I understood something crucial. To them, clarity felt like escalation. They tried to reassert control in subtle ways, correcting my tone, reframing my silence as immaturity, telling others I was going through something. I heard about it secondhand, not because they were worried, but because they needed a story that didn't include accountability. My father tried logic. "You know this affects everyone," he said. "Families work when people compromise." "I've compromised for years," I replied. "This is what happens when I stop." He didn't like that answer, because it made the math too clear. The consequences became more obvious after that. I wasn't consulted, I wasn't included, I wasn't considered. They wanted exclusion to feel like punishment. But it didn't. It felt like confirmation. Without the constant demand to justify myself, I saw the pattern clearly. Every explanation I'd ever given had been treated like a negotiation. Every emotion I'd shared had been weighed, minimized, or dismissed. And every time I accepted that, I taught them how to keep doing it. They noticed the shift. Not because they missed me, but because they missed access. They missed my availability, my emotional labor, my willingness to smooth things over. Silence had removed their leverage. The last attempt was quiet, an invitation framed as concern. "We should talk," my mother said. "This distance isn't healthy." I looked at the message for a long time. Then I typed one sentence. "I'm not interested in conversations that start with me being wrong." I didn't get a reply. That was the moment I knew the balance had tipped. They didn't know how to engage without control. And I no longer knew how to participate without erasing myself. Once that happens, there's no dramatic ending, just a slow, unmistakable shift. And the understanding that the thing they called overreacting was actually the moment I stopped pretending. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No final argument, no apology, no sudden understanding, just distance. And the longer it lasted, the clearer something became. I didn't miss explaining myself. I missed who I used to think I had to be in order to belong. The version of me that rehearsed conversations, that softened language, that made myself smaller so others wouldn't feel challenged. That version doesn't exist anymore. They eventually tried once more. A neutral message, carefully phrased. No ownership, no acknowledgement. Just an invitation to talk things through. I read it slowly, then I deleted it, because there was nothing left to explain. I finally understood what "you're overreacting" had always meant. It wasn't feedback, it was a signal. A way to tell me I was getting too close to naming something they didn't want to face. My reactions weren't the problem. My refusal to keep justifying them was. Life on my side became quieter, not lonely, clear. I stopped anticipating pushback, stopped preparing defenses, Stopped asking myself whether I was allowed to feel what I felt. For the first time, my internal life didn't require permission. They may still believe I walked away because I couldn't handle things. That's fine. I don't need them to understand. Because the truth is simple. I didn't stop explaining myself because I was overreacting. I stopped explaining myself because I finally realized I didn't owe anyone access to my reality. They told me I was overreacting. I didn't argue, I didn't convince, I didn't defend. I just stopped explaining. And in doing that, I took back something I hadn't even realized I'd given away: my authority over my own experience. That's what changed everything.